In this tutorial, we're going to enhance the simulated world by building an environment for our character to interact with. To do this, we're going to load in a mesh as a visual reference. We'll then use the endorphin environment tools to build the environment around this reference. We'll then introduce a character to the scene and allow him to interact with his environment. So let's begin with a new scene, and we'll delete the default character, and we can do that simply by left clicking on his name in the timeline and hitting the delete key. Now we want to import the mesh I mentioned earlier to use as a visual reference. We can do that from the File menu by selecting Import. We can do it using the button on the toolbar, or we can simply hit the I hotkey. Now navigate to the tutorial for creating environments directory, which you'll find within your installation directory. Then in the File of Types field, make sure you have OBJ file selected, and you should see the hall-only.obj file, and that's the one we want to import. So select that, click Open, and the import dialog box will be displayed. In here we can leave all the settings at the default and click OK, and in the viewport you'll see that that OBJ file has been imported. You may need to tumble and zoom a little in order to see the whole thing. In Endorphin, OBJ files are displayed as graphic objects, and these are the objects which we use as a template to build the environment around. Now there are two basic types of objects we can use to build the environment in this scene, and those are mass objects and collision objects. These grey icons on the main toolbar are mass objects, but for the time being we're interested in the blue icons, which are collision objects. So now let's create a box collision object by clicking on the box in the main toolbar. In the viewport you can see an orange box has been created. The orange colour simply indicates that it's selected by default. Now we're going to use this box to begin to build the staircase over here on the right hand side. So we want to position this box approximately so it fits the bottom step over here, and we're going to use the Move, Rotate and Scale tools to do that. So let's select the Move tool, zoom in a little, and begin to position this box so it's roughly in the right place at the bottom of the stairs. We can then scale it. Remember that you can double click in the middle of these handles at any point to move between Move, Rotate and Scale. Now I'm going to move into a split full view in the viewport, and I can do that either using the icon over here on the right hand side of the toolbar, or simply by hitting the V key, and then I have a top view, a front view and a left view. I can use these to slightly more accurately position and size this collision object. Notice that whichever of the four split views I'm working in at any given time has a yellow border, and this simply means that this is the active section of the viewport. I'm now going to ensure that the perspective section is active by selecting our collision object in that view. You can see that now has a yellow border, so that now when I hit the V key to return to a single view, that view is the perspective view. Now again, make sure that your collision object is selected and use the Control-C Control-V key combination to copy and paste it. You won't see it just yet because it's positioned exactly over the first collision object. But when we use the Move tool, we'll lift it up and move it backwards to represent the second step in the sequence. I'm now going to use the L hotkey to move to left view to get the height about right, and then the F key just to move it backwards a bit and match it up there in front view. And now I can use the P key to return to perspective view. The various different views available are also accessible through a right click context menu in the viewport, and there they are down the bottom. We can now select both of those steps by Control left clicking, and again use Control C, Control V to copy and paste, and continue to build the staircase in this way. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I can now select all four to build the next four, and so on. And I'll do that now, and we'll pick things up again when I reach this landing just here. And so now we have the first 7 steps built, and we want to go on to build this landing area just here. And I can do that in exactly the same way by selecting any one of these steps, copying and pasting it, and positioning it and sizing it appropriately. But the problem I have is that when I try to select some of these steps by left clicking, what I actually select is the graphic in the background. Now we can avoid that by going to the View menu, selecting Node View, the hotkey for that is N, and that will open a hierarchical view of your scene. And just here you can see the hall-only graphic represented that we imported right at the beginning of the tutorial. I'm going to move this node view down underneath the property editor where I can dock it, just to tidy the screen up a bit. And then by clicking on the icon for the hall only graphic, I can turn that visual representation off. And now it's very easy to select any one of those steps in the viewport and use Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V to copy and paste it. I can now return to the node view and turn that graphic visualization back on and use the move tool to begin to position this object to represent the landing. Using the T hotkey to move to the top view, start to scale it so it's approximately about the same size and shape as that landing, using P to return to perspective. You can spend a bit more time getting this accurate than I'm going to. That'll do for now. And now again, returning to the node view, I'm going to turn that whole graphic off and select all of these steps other than the landing. Again, using Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V, I'm going to copy and paste those. In the node view, turn the graphic representation back on and use the second set of steps to build the second flight of steps over here. Move to a top view. I can select the rotate tool and spin them round, then move them approximately into position. Returning to the perspective view. It's not looking too bad. And then you can continue to do exactly the same thing to build the next set of steps here, and in fact the landing at the top. And I'll pick it up again there. So now we have all the steps on the right hand side built, and we can simply copy and paste again to take these sections over to the left. So we'll turn off that graphic again, select all the steps for the bottom section, Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V, and turn the graphic back on. Now I'm going to move to a top view, use the move tool to position these, and then the rotate tool to swing them round, move them back some. So we've got the bottom section of steps on the other side. Move back to a perspective view, again turn off the graphic, select the landing, Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V, graphic back on, use the move tool. All I have to do is move it straight across, move to a top view again, because the height's going to be exactly as it was on the other side. And I can do exactly the same for this section of steps here, copy and pasting its equivalent on the right hand side here. So we'll pick things up again once I've built this section of steps. So now we have all of the steps and landings built, we want to start to create something to represent this arch just here. So let's hit the L hotkey to move into left view, and ensure that you're in wireframe view by right clicking in the viewport, and if necessary selecting wireframe view from the context menu. And now we can create a new collision object and position and size it so that it stretches across the breadth of the arch. This is the back of the arch here, and the front of the steps is the front of the arch. And once you're happy with the position of that, you can hit the F key to move into front view, again ensuring that you are in wireframe view. And now we can use this block to begin to build the arch block by block. So we'll place this one in position on the top left hand side to form the first block of the arch, and then once that's in position we can copy and paste it using Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V, move it across and rotate it to begin to build down the left hand side of the arch, and again Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V to put the third block into place. And so you can continue down this left hand side building the arch block by block. And of course once you have one side built, it's a simple matter to copy and paste the entire set of blocks, rotate them and place them on the right hand side here. And that's what I'm going to continue to do now. Build the entire arch, and once that's complete, we'll pick things up again. So now we've created the stairs, the landings, and the arch. The next thing to do will be to create this banister. But this is going to be slightly different, because what we're going to be doing is placing a character at the top of the stairs here and having him stagger backwards and fall through this banister. Now this means that the banister needs to break and interact with both the character and the rest of the environment. So far we've been using passive collision objects to build the environment. Now while these have collision properties, they don't move under simulation. But we're going to be placing a character at the top of the stairs here and having him stagger backwards and fall through this banister. Because of this, we'll build the banister from mass objects, which do have inertial and collision properties and will interact under simulation. So let's begin by creating a cylindrical mass object, and there it is in the viewport. And we can position this in exactly the same way as we would with any other object, using the move, rotate and scale tools. And I'm going to create this first upright on the left here at the top of the stairs. And I'm going to rotate that. I can do that either using the handle or by moving to its property view, and in the X orientation field putting a value of 90 degrees, and that will swing it through 90 degrees and make it upright. Now I want to scale this to make its radius a lot smaller, a lot thinner, and then scale it up so it's longer, and I'm going to move it up. And I don't want to rest it exactly on the top of this landing yet, because with mass objects, because they will simulate, I can move into pose move, select this mass object, and because effectively when you're pose moving you're simulating, I can now drop that down so that it collides with the top landing and sits exactly where I want it to. Now you'll notice that I've made these cylinders somewhat larger than the uprights and banisters on the template. That's really just for demonstration purposes. In production, you'd probably want to match the radius of these cylinders more closely to the radius of the template graphic banister in order to get more accurate collisions. Now I can, just as before, use Ctrl C and Ctrl V and move a copy of that upright across to the other side. And again, Ctrl C, Ctrl V will give me another copy, which will allow me to begin to create these crossbars. I can rotate that once more, moving to its property view. I'm going to put a value of -90 degrees exactly in there. And once more, I can move into pose move and drop that down so it sits exactly on the top of the upright. Ctrl C, Ctrl V allows me to copy and paste it, move it across to the other side, and there we have our banister. So let's just simulate and see what happens. And of course, because these mass objects will simulate and interact, they fall down under gravity. To avoid that, let's create a constraint in the environment timeline by right clicking on that timeline and going to create constraint event. I'll have that start at frame 0 and drag it out to finish at about frame 500 for now. Ensure by clicking select in its property view that you have those banister objects selected. And now when we simulate, the banister will stay in one piece. Now we can add a character to the scene. So let's click on the Add Character button from the toolbar, select Standard Simulation Character and click OK. And there he is. So let's move him so he's approximately at the top of the stairs on that top landing. Move it a little bit further forward and across a little. And just as with the banisters, we can move into pose move. This time select the character's character cube just between his feet there. That will select the entire character in pose move mode. So again, we are effectively simulating, which means that we can move him down and he will collide with that collision object at the top there, be exactly where we want him to be. So now to get this character to stagger, I'm going to right click in his timeline and create a force event. This will give him a little push in the chest, and then we'll right click again and create a behaviour event which will start at frame 0, and we'll change that behaviour from the default arms windmill to a stagger 2.0. Now let's simulate and see what we get. The character staggers back and collides with the banister but then falls forward. But remember, we want this banister to break and the character to fall through it. So if we now return to the point where the character makes contact with that banister, we can slide the extent of the constraint to finish at that point. So now let's pull back a little and simulate. And you can see that this time the character staggers back, breaks through the banister and falls to the floor. Now of course you could experiment by adding additional behaviours here. You could add perhaps a writhe in mid-air as he falls through the banister, and possibly a body fetal or catch fall as he reaches the floor. So you can see that by using a combination of mass and collision objects, you can build complex environments with which your character can interact.